Now, Courtnay Heading is a man who says he is on a mission to make the island well again. And I think it's fair to say that some of his views may be seen as quite controversial. You might not agree with everything that he says. And I should say at this point, we did invite the Department of Health to take part in today's programme, but they declined the offer, saying we will not take part in this interview. But before we find out exactly what Courtney feels needs to be done and how he intends to do it, let's find out a little bit more about the man himself. Now, Courtney, how long have you been on the island? Was it 11 years or so?
Nearly 11, yeah.
And what was it that brought you over here?
A mixture of things. I met a guy on a plane and we started a business together. He moved here from the States, so we were flying to America, but he moved to the island. I think really seeing, dare I say, Tony Blair's face on the television so often. And the third major point is I love your biking roads. I've ridden with my rain-soaked wife in 21 countries so far. So the road is absolutely almost sacred, I would think, the mountain course.
And when it comes to your background, your career, what's been the main focus of that?
Startups. I've done 5 startups since '85, and the latest one, Jurby Wellness, was really a follow-on from what I did for government. I was a healthcare innovation consultant, both in DED and Cabinet Office with John Shimin. And the biggest determinant, I think, of health around the world that's been denatured is our food. So we struggle with lots of illnesses that we didn't have many years ago. I actually think gluten intolerance is more glyphosate intolerance. So when you look at what we eat and what denatured processes take part in farming, we're not having those honest debates. And I think that wellness derived from good food, wholesome food, and then looking at the toxins that come into our body, disease being either a lack or a toxin.
And when it comes to your sort of qualifications in this area, what sort of qualifications do you have?
0. What I do is assemble teams, just like with startups. So I've not had one fail so far, and the last one raised, I think, £60 million. So all I do is assemble teams. So I look at scientific peer-reviewed papers in JAMA or British Medical Journal, and people who are research experts. And my current concern is particularly the HPV vaccine, because there's concerns in 18 countries since Japan suspended recommendation in 2013.
And we'll come back to that in a second, because obviously there's a lot to talk about in just that one sentence, Courtney, and people will be listening, getting probably a little bit riled and wanting to know more. But before we do, I'm going to come back on something you said at the start, because you said how important food was, produce was, and sort of what we're putting in our bodies. On the Isle of Man, surely we're in a really great place to actually be able to look after ourselves with the produce that comes from the island. Sort of.
If you look at farming practices or people here who farmed 60 years, some of them are questioning why we desiccate wheat particularly, and barley and other products with glyphosate just before we harvest it, 2 weeks before, to dry it. So when you look at Malta that suspended glyphosate, I think we should have the conversations where the French would say it scorches the earth, and it's something which will, with genetically modified food, end up in our animals. If we're meat eaters, end up in us. But it's particularly the dysregulation of the gut. We're seeing that in ever greater numbers.
And again, I think I would just ask you where your knowledge of this comes from, because I find it hard for somebody who doesn't have specific qualifications in this area to be so righteous about what you're saying.
The paper I would reference is from Stephanie Seneff, who references 201 papers, and that 31-page glyphosate study. Email me, Courtney@jurbywellness.im. I'll send it to you. So all the stuff I quote will be in papers that have been out to the public. Some of the things I say about vaccines have had 500,000 downloads as a paper, but people won't have seen them. So happy to reference it. I seek public debate, preferably on film, then we have a permanent record for everyone.
And how well would you say you understand every single thing that you read?
I have bias, because those biases have been born from starting to want to bring health jobs here, then realise actually it's a sick treatment service. We have the wrong language since 1984. Up is down, black is white, truth is lies, health is sick treatment. The NHS is brilliant at acute and accident. I was on the M6 yesterday, an air ambulance landed. Thank goodness they got someone out and did the right thing. Fantastic. Acute is brilliant. We are absolutely drowning in chronic treatment that has not been researched, and we have a diet, the UK Eat Well diet and the US My Plate diet, leading to the biggest obesity, diabetes epidemic ever seen. We're following the grain industry, not the food industry. And so I just read, and I like debate. I've done 2. I've done one on wellness with our minister, health minister, and one on statins. But there was a great reluctance even to debate statins, which I think will be seen to be one of the great errors of the last 50 years, based on fake science.
I just want to bring something up with regard to you saying that we were all about sick treatment. Surely when we're talking about vaccination, we're talking about prevention, which is the complete opposite of what you've just said.
Smallpox vaccine in 1971 was withdrawn because the 34 deaths in the 40s and 50s were from the vaccine.
34 out of how many?
Out of the 26 that were from the smallpox virus. If you look at Richard Halverson, Vaccines, A Parent's Guide, you can see all the 600 peer-reviewed scientific evidence. Smallpox was stopped as a vaccine because it was the vaccine doing the deaths. People haven't read that science. 5% of the world was inoculated against smallpox. Often these things die out, and when you take one strain and focus on it, mutated strains come back in other areas. We think we're cleverer than we are.
So how would you justify then, obviously there was a lot of controversy over MMR, for example, which was found to be based on flawed evidence. One doctor who based it on 12 cases, so it's been completely and utterly discredited. There are now a huge rise in a number of people contracting measles, which is not a simple childhood disease, which many people believe it is, and does cause death. How do you
counter that? 3 points. First point, 2 weeks ago they suspended the MMR vaccine in Samoa because the Prime Minister of Samoa, his son had been vaccine damaged. He's now talking, but they suspended the MMR program.
How did you know he was vaccine damaged?
Because the Prime Minister saw him regress early onset after a vaccine. But the 2 deaths from MMR in Samoa, most people haven't heard about, but if you go and Google it, you will see he suspended the MMR program because the people who injected the baby didn't listen to the mother's informed consent. The baby died within 3 minutes.
But there will always be people, Courtney, with due respect, who will face side effects and whatever, because no vaccine program can be 100% safe. We know that. We know there are side effects and we know there are potential risks. But the overall benefit, how many people have been saved because of vaccines?
If you look at the schedule that we looked at when I was a boy, I had 5 vaccines after the age of 5. I've not had a vaccine for 50 years. An American child now on the official vaccine schedule will have 72 doses, 72. They'll often have 10 different viruses injected in them before the MMR. So what Andrew Wakefield wanted was single measles, mumps, rubella vaccinations. You can get those in London at Baby Jab's Clinic. You can get them in Manchester. You can get them in Ohio with Paul Thomas. Autism goes away when you separate M and R. A GP here on Friday said we shouldn't be vaccinating for mumps. I went to measles parties as a youngster. We've got rid of some of the
people die from measles though, Courtney. People actually die. There are children who have died in the UK recently because they've been so brainwashed by people who don't really know what they're talking about and are basing it on, you know, you've talked about the fact that you've read so many peer-reviewed papers that have been investigated countless times. But we're talking about MMR, for example, which was completely discredited.
It was the first triple live virus, the first vaccine introduced in 20 years. So when you look at the triple live virus, it's what's in it. The formaldehyde, ethyl mercury, methyl mercury and aluminium have no place in the human body. They misfold our proteins. So when you separate them out, go and look at Paul Thomas, 1,000 children, when he gives the MMR vaccine as 3 separate vaccines.
But look at all the people who've had MMR.
Autism goes away.
Look at the people who have had the MMR vaccine. All my 3 children have, and you know, touch wood, they're all okay. So there are thousands of children who are okay after having the vaccinations.
In the US, 1 in 9 cases of asthma. You have an autoimmune crisis from type 1 diabetes through to eczema, through to allergies. Peanut adjuvant has caused 1.5 million Americans to have a peanut allergy that was unknown. I fly with peanuts. I like to travel with my own water and peanuts. A bit sad, not to save money, but I like to have my food with me. So when you can't open for the first time peanuts on a plane, I've been asked 3 times, it's because of adjuvant 65 put into a vaccine. It's a water-soluble fat. And that peanut oil was put in. 1.5 million Americans have anaphylaxis, the ability, as they do tragically, caused by peanut allergy because their immune system recognised as other, not self, the peanut oil in their vaccine. It's not the virus, it's the adjuvants I want tested here in a laboratory. I want the government to do this, and I will do this on any vaccine, particularly HPV.
So are you saying then that you want testing, but you don't necessarily want vaccines in their entirety to be stopped?
I want safe vaccines. If you look at Chris Exley, who's known the world over as Mr. Aluminium, he took 20 years to decide that he actually thought there might be a correlation between the very, very high levels of adjuvant, aluminium adjuvant from vaccines in the autopsied brains of autistic children. So Google Chris Exley from Keele University. You will see what he found, and you would also want to watch 2 films. injecting aluminium and the age of aluminium. It will change a life on aluminium being injected into. We can ingest it, eat it, and we chelate it. We get it through our body. You can't deal with it when you inject it.
Lots of people clearly do deal with it though, Courtney, and a vaccine can only be used in people if scientific tests called clinical trials show it is safe and effective and that the benefits outweigh any risks.
There was no inert placebo used in HPV. I will go on court happily, because this is going to be legal cases in 18 countries. Japan started. That's why they suspended it in 2013. There's 100 cases going through their courts. There were 800 damaged girls in Denmark. There were 100 damaged girls in the UK. I believe I have 2 vaccine damaged girls here.
But you know, HPV is the major cause of cervical cancer, which damages how many women? If that can be eradicated...
It's 300,000. You should look at the video by Diane Harper. Diane Harper was the lead researcher on the Gardasil trials. It ranks number 20 in cancers for women, according to Richard Halverson's 600 studies in his book, Vaccines, A Parent's Guide. He calls it HPV, a vaccine too soon. Helen Lobato in Australia has written a book also about Gardasil and the harms of it. You've got Japan, Denmark, Canada, Australia, France, Sweden, England, yes, I am reading for a list, Italy, Colombia, Mexico, Netherlands, Israel. All with harms. Once you have that on a vaccine, to think because half the market is missing, we're going to give this to boys, I believe, as I said to the health minister here, the education minister, it is a crime against humanity not to have a public debate.
Do you know, I read something really interesting, because as many anti-vaccine papers there are out there, there are many which actually want to debunk the so-called myths promoted by the anti-vaccine religion, which is how I've seen it described. And one of the things is that there is a disconnect between personal activities today and cancer that could be diagnosed 20 to 30 years from now. I mean, the reality is at the moment, what you're saying, Courtney, is you're kind of trying to foretell what might happen. It doesn't sound that you really know and are sure of your facts. And certainly it goes back to the fact that you're not even qualified in this area. So why should we be listening to you?
You shouldn't. What you should do, I implore you, I plead with you to do your own research. Having met Kessia Ling, who was on the original Gardasil trial in Denmark, her grandmother died of cervical cancer. She's not anti-vax, but she has a life that has been crushed in the 15 years since. So that process of just listening to the evidence, I want that scientific debate. I want to debate the herd immunity issues around whooping cough and measles. You will see that the biggest shedders are those with their immune compromised systems, both in Disney and also in the US, the case of whooping cough. You now have shingles being driven by the over-vaccination on chickenpox and making much worse diseases for those older in society. We've never seen so many children with autoimmune diseases, and you can look at those, but let's test what's in the vaccine. Pig cells, mouse cells, human cells, fetal cells, fecal cells, aluminium, formaldehyde, polysorbate 80, which is a known disruptor. Once you look at those bits of evidence and link up the scientific published literature, you can see they shouldn't be injected into humans.
But then I just wonder what your view is on medicines generally. I mean, the sort of things that you describe, I mean, I'm no medical expert, and I should say that now, and that is why we invited the Department of Health to take part in this programme, and it is a shame that they're not here. But, you know, think about the medicines that are available now to treat all sorts of diseases, and medicines which keep people alive. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about improving and prolonging people's lives. I mean, would you just dispel with all that? I mean, what's your alternative?
I've said earlier, I think in terms of accidents, there was one yesterday on the M6, an acute, we're absolutely brilliant. And the difference between the 1950s and now is that in the 1950s you might take one pill for a few weeks, If you look at the Quality Outcomes Framework, which was a 30 billion experiment, £30 billion by the British government, between 1994 and 2010, it meant a trebling, literally, of people on medicine. So you went in, they tested your cholesterol. So those of us who know cholesterol is a range, and all-cause mortality goes up as cholesterol goes down. So when you want to look at the Japanese studies, when you want to look at actually the real-world studies, you would say those medicines have no place in the human body for 85% of people who have them for primary care.
So how do you count then the fact that we're living longer?
America's peaked. If you look at the real evidence in the last 5 years, they have more morbidity in the end of life. Cuba spends...
Well, morbidity at the end of life, with all due respect, is, you know, you have to die of something, I suppose.
But it's the morbidity, the disruption and the 5 and 10 meds where people just don't have their quality of life back. So if you read The Cholesterol Con, if you read Lipitor, The Thief of Memory, Mind, Muscle and Mood, my friend's husband suicided on a statin. went to the doctor, was well. After 10 meds, the first med he couldn't
Why did he
cope.
go to the doctor if he was well? I mean, that's...
Right. When you go in, quality outcomes framework mean they test you for cholesterol and they'll test you for blood pressure. They were what I call disease monger you. I went to the doctor with my cholesterol. He took my blood just to sign in Ramsey, no other reason. He said your cholesterol's 6.1, so I do the parish walk. I don't worry about my cholesterol. I don't worry about my blood pressure. What I do is look at functional medicine. How far can you walk, swim, talk, make love to your wife, all those things that go away on these medicines. So when you look at what goes on, as you've used quality outcomes framework, that was silently buried. So a 20-year experiment, which literally trebled the medicines a 55 to 60-year-old man's on. My friend's 83, he's pill-free. He's actually 84 now. I want to do what he's doing. So the pill-free chemical, these are not side effects. These are real effects on drugs, which is why if you look at the patient information leaflet and do your homework, they're not side effects, they're expected effects. One drug is meant to treat one condition, but it often has 100 other side effects, and that's what's screened up. There's no money in that. Pharmaceutical lobbying is the biggest and most powerful in the US. It needs us ill and dependent on those drugs.
I think this is a conversation we could carry on having
Go on
for a
all
long
day.
time, Courtney. But I mean, I would just also say there are side effects of very many serious illnesses which are, people are vaccinated against. But very briefly, you want to have a public debate on this. I'm intrigued to know what reaction you've had from the Department of Health.
Fabulous. The debate is fabulous. The result I've had 2 years ago, I asked at a high level in Department of Health and Social Care, could I have a debate on vaccines, statins and antidepressants? My concern of all three hasn't changed. I also asked at high level in public health, could I have a debate on HPV vaccine? This was last year. Not only did the individual concerns say no, they said they wouldn't, nor would their team attend such a debate. Fortunately, Mr. Speaker in the oldest Parliament on earth, the Honourable Juan Watterson, has agreed to chair a debate in the Burrell Suite at 2 p.m. on the 14th of August. If there's any GPs out there, I've written to a lady who coordinates your diaries, please come, please debate. I want two of you. I'm the insurgent, you're the incumbent. Two of you, one of me. I'll present for 20 minutes, you speak for twice as long, then we open it to the floor. I'm building a list of 100 unvaccinated kids on Ireland. I have 20 so far. Anyone listening, unvaccinated kids, will then do a real-world comparison. When Anthony Mawson did it in America, he found much less incidence of autoimmune dysfunction amongst homeschooled unvaccinated kids. I want a real-world clinical trial, vaccinated versus unvaccinated.
I suppose it could be argued if children are homeschooled, they're less likely to be, left susceptible to other diseases and illnesses that they might pick up in school. But I guess I say this is a debate which could go on for some time. If you've got any thoughts on this, do let us know.